Okay, in this video, we're going to look at taking a whole number and timesing it by a decimal number. This is something where, you know, really in fifth grade, when you get to this concept of multiplying decimals, quite a bit of the work that we're going to see is going to be based off of models. And basically, when you think of a model in math, you're just thinking of a picture. And so this is a pretty popular one that we see, and we're going to practice this quite a bit. And so I'm going to show you just some practice problems where we're going to take a whole number and times it by a decimal. So I'm going to first start here with the first problem on the left side of the page. The first problem is 19 hundredths times 2. And so I'm going to circle that at the top, and then I'm going to think about how I could go and model that problem to find my answer. And so again, when you kind of break this down and you think about what math is taking place here, you're really just thinking about repeating 19 hundredths twice, or you're maybe thinking about repeated addition because that's what multiplication is. So one of the ways that you could do that is just model it with a hundredths grid. And so on the left here, you've got a hundredths grid. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to shade with blue this first column. And I'm just going to do a real quick shade here. And what this is going to represent is if I shade a column from the top to the bottom, that represents 10 hundredths, which essentially is the same thing as 1/10. And so if I were to count them individually, I just shaded 10. And so now I'm going to go to my next column, but this time I'm only going to shade 9 of them. And that's because if I'm making a model for this problem, then I've got one group of 19 hundredths shown. Okay, the next step is I'm going to change my color here. I'm going to get red. And then now I'm going to go shade another group of 19. So I'm going to start at the bottom. So that would be 1. I'm going to shade a whole other column here. So that would be another 10. And so I would like to ask my students, okay, at this point, if I stopped, how many did I just shade? Well, 10 and 1, that makes 11. And so how many more would I need to shade to get 19? And so that question would pop up in my class and we discuss it. If I have 11, then that means I need to shade 8 more. So I'm going to very carefully shade 8 of these, which is going to leave me with 2 kind of, left off that last column. And so if I stop and I look at this problem here, I have now modeled 19 hundredths twice, or 19 hundredths times 2. And so if I wanted to get an answer to this problem, all I'd have to do is just count everything that I just shaded. So I have shaded 1 whole column here, I'm going to use black, 2, 3, that makes 30 of those squares, or 30 hundredths. And then I also shaded 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. My answer to this problem simply is just 38 hundredths. And all I had to do there was just show it in a drawing, or show it with, basically groups. And so that's a quick and easy way to get the answer. This next problem, 38 hundredths times 2, I'm going to kind of do the same thing here. I'm going to switch up colors a little bit. I'm going to go with a green color. This time I have 38 hundredths times 2. So I need 2 groups of 38 hundredths. So I'm going to shade 38 hundredths in green. So I'm going to shade really quick here. So there's 1 column. There's 2 columns. There's 3 columns. That gives me 30. And so now I want to shade an extra 8. And at this point, I'd stop and go, okay, well, I've got half of this model completed. I've shaded 1 group of 38 hundredths. So I'm going to switch here. I'm going to go to a yellow color. So I'm going to go ahead and shade those last 2. And I'm going to shade the next column. And I'm going to shade the column after that. And so I might stop at this point and go, okay, well, how many do I have now? I've got 2 columns of 10 each. So that gives me 20. And then I have 22. And so I'd probably ask my students, can we shade another one? And we could, because that's going to give me another 10. So if I have 22 and I shade another one, that's going to give me 32. And then I would, again, in my class, we would talk about how many more need to be shaded here. So then that would give me, if I was at 32, I'd need 6 more. And so I'd very carefully just count 6, make sure I have 6 there shaded, and then I would stop. And I'm basically going to go and kind of do the same thing that I did on the previous problem. If I want to get an answer to this, basically all I want to do here is just count. And so I've got 1 column, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It looks like I have shaded 76 hundredths for my final answer here. And so again, when you're looking at these these types of problems here, you're just really thinking about repeated addition. In this case, you're just basically doubling up because you're timesing by 2. They're not always going to be times 2, but these 2 examples just had to be. So those are 2 examples of what a whole number times a decimal could look like. All right, on this last page here, we're going to practice a couple more. This first problem on the left says 7 hundredths times 7 hundredths times 9. And so when I look at this, one of the things I might ask my students to do in my classroom is kind of stop and think, okay, well, how many groups should I see on this model? How many different colors should I see, or how many different, separate groups am I going to notice? And really, you would relate that to whatever your whole number is, because your whole number is what you're repeating. And so you're basically going to make 9 groups of 7 hundredths. And so on this one, I'm going to shade this one a little bit differently. This time, I'm not going to get different colors. Since I have 9 groups here, I'm going to kind of alternate my colors. So I'm going to start with 7, and I'm going to use the black here. And so I'm going to start shading with black, and I've got 7 hundredths. And then I'm going to go to red, and I'm going to get another 7 hundredths. The only issue with this is when you're making these or modeling these, you just have to be really, really careful, because these squares are pretty small, and you've got to make sure that you count carefully. So at this point, if I stopped here, I'd only have 2 groups of 7 hundredths. Okay, I'm going to go back to my black color here, and I could think, all right, if I have the rest of that column, that's 6, so I'm going to do 6 plus 1 more. And then notice I'm just kind of alternating back and forth, back and forth. And so it could be a little bit tricky doing that. But again, if you're really kind of following along with this model, you're really just looking for groups. And so if I go back and forth with black and red, I'm still really going to potentially get 9 groups here. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to shade another 7. Okay, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 groups. So I've still got some stuff to do here. I'm going to go back to my black. I'm going to shade 2 out of that, and then another 5 here. And really, as you're doing this, you can always kind of stop and think about where you're at. It's almost like you're doing your facts of 7. Because right now, if I stopped, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 groups. Well, 7 times 5 is 35. And if I look carefully, I've shaded 35 of these squares. All right, I want to keep going. There's another 5 in this group. So that gives me 2 more. All right, I'm going to switch back. Here's another group of 7. Okay, I'll go back to reds. Okay, and so I'm going to pause here. I'm not done, but what I want to think about is I'm going to get a different color. I'm going to get a color that's going to kind of stand out. I'm going to get this green color, and I'm just going to count my groups here. I've got 1 group, I've got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I've got 8 groups so far. And so now I just need to go, all right, I'm almost there. I'm almost got my 9 groups. So I'm going to start here with black again. And I'm going to think, okay, I need basically another group of 700s. So I'm going to go another 4 on that column, and then another 3 on this column. And then I'm going to go back to my green and label that last group of 700s. And then I kind of just stop and think, okay, the whole thing that I'm looking at, so all the black and all the red put together, what do I see here? And I could simply see it as, I could count columns. So let me get a different color here. Let me get blue. And I could see, all right, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 columns. So that gives me 60. And then over here, I've got a group of just 3. So I'm going to say that that's going to be the same as just 300ths. And so really, I'm going to turn this into just 60 hundredths plus 300ths, which gives me a total of 6,300 shaded. And so that model there, 7 hundredths times 9, gives me 63 hundredths. Okay, the last example here, I'm going to switch back to a different color. Again, I'm thinking I've got 3 groups here. I'm timesing 24 hundredths times 3. And so I'm going to start with green, and I'm going to shade 2 columns at a time because that's going to give me 20. And then from here, I'm going to shade 1, 2, 3, 4. And so now I've got one group of 24 hundredths. I'm going to switch over to red. So now I'm going to shade the rest of that column and the next. So at that point, I have 16. And so if I have 16 and I'm only shading a group of 24, I've got to be really careful here and make sure I don't shade too much. So I could count individually. That could be 17, 18, 19, 20, and then 21, 22, 23, 24 to make sure I can only get 24 in there. And then I'm going to switch it over to a yellow color to finish this off. I've got 2 groups, or excuse me, 2 hundredths there at the end of that column. I'm going to shade 2 columns together because I know that's going to give me 20. And then 20 plus 2, I've got my 2 over here. That gives me 22 plus an extra 2, that gives me 24. And so at this point, I can stop and see, all right, I've got 3 groups of 24 hundredths, which gives me an answer of, and again, if I just go back and I just count, all I'm doing here is I'm just counting however many I just shaded. All the colors is what I'm looking at here. My 3 groups are my colors, but every time I'm looking at it, and I'm thinking, okay, I really still just want an answer here, I can go back and just count how many I have. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 columns. So that's 70 hundredths. And then just an extra 2 hundredths there. It looks like I shaded a total of 72 hundredths. And so now I can put that together. 24 hundredths times 3 gives you 72 hundredths.